Okay, so let's get started. So our second, or actually, we have more speakers in the first, second set of the presentation is Candace Agonafir. So she originally had a bachelor in physical science and physics, moved on for a master's in more operational research, and then got a PhD in civil engineering. And she's been looking at basically using regression machine learning techniques to detect and predict urban flooding. So thanks.
So hello, I'm Candace Agonafir, and my talk today is going to be on urban flooding. It's based on a recently published paper we have. It's called A Review of Recent Advances in Urban Flood Modeling and Mitigation Techniques. It was published earlier this year in the Journal of Water Security. So basically, this is a qualitative review, and it's geared towards the motivation behind continued urban flood research. So I will talk a little bit about the health and safety impacts, the financial fallouts, and the effects of a changing climate. We'll also talk about the factors known to aggregate flood occurrence. Lastly, we'll shift towards a discussion on response efforts, modeling techniques, and mitigation efforts. So first, I'll start with a definition. What is urban flooding? Well, flooding essentially is the submergence of water in an area that was previously dry. So that's a general definition. But you might want to know exactly what do they mean by urban flooding. Well, urban flooding could be a variety of types. It can be coastal, riverine, fluvial, flash. So coastal flooding, it's water inundation by coastal lands. Riverine, water inundation, you're near a river and the water is coming off the land. Fluvial is induction of water that is independent of a water body. Okay, so fluvial means it's not riverine, it's not coastal. Flash flooding, it's the type of flooding that begins within 3 to 6 hours of rainfall. Or it could be caused by a dam, but it's very quick. It occurs quickly, it ends quickly. Urban flooding could be any one of those things. Oftentimes it is fluvial or flash flooding, but basically it is flooding propagated by the specific characteristics of urbanization. And the urban landscape is playing a contributing factor. So when you think of urban flooding, it's basically that the drains are being overwhelmed in an urban area. Okay, so talking a little bit about the health and economic impacts. Well, first you have human health and safety. The number one most prominent result of urban flooding could be death. So people can die. And I think the Hurricane Ida event is a good example of that. There were 44 deaths in the New York City, New Jersey, and Westchester County areas due to post-tropical depression Ida. There was a flooding event in Germany and Belgium later. There was 180 deaths associated with that flooding event. In general, in New York City, there's 100 flood-related deaths annually, not in New York City, in the United States. And there are close to 5,000 flooding deaths internationally per year. But you can also worry about injury and water contamination. So when we're talking about non-fatal injuries, a person could experience blunt force trauma by a fallen tree. They can have contusions, lacerations, they can be bit by animals, or get punctured. But we're talking about water contamination. It could be contaminated with human waste, industrial hazards, carcinogenic compounds, and you might get a skin rash, you get gastrointestinal illness, wound infections, tetanitis, etc. So there's a few side effects to the floodwaters as well. So the economic impact, that's pretty large too, they're substantial. If you have a single event like Hurricane Ida, it had cost greater than $75 billion for this flooding experience. But, there's direct costs that can be loss of wages. Someone who cannot make it on the subway, they're paid hourly, they lost their wage for the day. But then you also have indirect costs. So that could be business interruption over a long period of time. You can have long-term infrastructural damage that might not show right away, but it's over a period of time. We have small chronic floods. There's financial fallouts from that as well. Okay, so what are some of the influences of urban flooding? What can cause it? Urbanization is a major factor. When we think of urbanization, we're creating buildings, sidewalks, streets. These are all impervious surfaces. Infiltration from the rain cannot get into the soil. There's no ground to absorb the water. And urbanization is expected to increase in the US and globally. So urban flooding is going to be more of a concern. And then you have climate change. Climate change can induce more extreme natural disaster events, such as hurricanes, tropical storms. Also, there could be an increase in sea surface temperatures. And it was found that for every 1.8 degrees Celsius increase in sea surface temperatures, extreme storms increased by 21%. There are greater amounts of rainfall and intensity, and this will exhaust the current drainage system. So we have pipes within the sewer system, and they are built to carry a certain capacity of water. So these extreme events increase, the drainage systems will be overwhelmed. For instance, I believe Hurricane Ida had in New York City 3.75 inches per hour. That's was a global record. And the pipes are just 9 foot to handle that amount of water per hour. That's a lot of water in one day, let alone 1 hour. I'm thinking quantity, but let me check that. I'll check that. And let's see. Okay, so let's talk about the specific factors that are known to aggregate urban flooding. One, the obvious one is precipitation. And that variable can be expressed in various ways. It could be the total daily rainfall amount. If it's raining over a period of time and it doesn't stop, that can cause flooding. You can think about rainfall intensity, as I was saying, from the Hurricane Ida, 3.75 inches per hour. That's a lot for 1 hour. The water just doesn't have enough time to go into the stormwater drains. It goes in a pond and flood. Duration, how long is the storm lasting? And then also direction. The storm can just go to the top part of the Bronx and might not stand up. So these are variables that you want to take into consideration in your modeling. Then you have topography. For instance, elevation. Higher elevation is known to not have instances of urban flooding as much. And also steeper slopes. If you have a steeper slopes, the water will keep running. Flat surfaces, the water tends to run. So topographical considerations are there. You have the land features, which is basically the building of sidewalks, buildings, streets, all these impervious surfaces that affect urban flooding and increase flood risk. Then we can also talk about infrastructural factors. Catch basins are one that are quite popular in New York City. The catch basins allow the water to go into the drainage system. If they are clogged, they won't go in. And I actually have a video where I was taping a catch basin. It doesn't have to be fully clogged. The water, it just changes the pathway of the water. It goes around the curb and stays on the street. It doesn't go in. So it doesn't even have to be fully clogged to cause water ponding. You have sewer backups. The private sewer systems could be backed up, and then you have sewer surcharge. So actually, you have water in the private drains going back up. So that's what else to know. And sea level rise, so that's another issue. It induces a coastal overflow into an urban environment. New York City has is basically coastal in a way in certain areas. And then NOAA reports that water levels along the coastline will rise an additional 10 to 12 inches by 2050. So sea level rise is a concern. So what kind of models do we have to identify flood risk or to predict the areas where it will flood during a rain event? The most traditional type of models are the hydrologic physical models. The hydraulic part is the modeling that looks at the sewer network and it makes calculations based on that. The hydrologic part is where you calculate filtration rates, etc. And the advantages of the hydrologic physical model are that they're very accurate. That's one, they're accurate. And they make decent predictions. But the disadvantage is, number one, especially for a city like New York, you need drainage data. In New York City, they won't release their drainage data, at least not to the public or to the universities. So you don't even know where the drains are and what size they are. You just can't model, so it doesn't work. And they also have long computational times and high costs associated with that. So to resolve these issues with the physical models, the data availability, the cost issues, a lot of researchers have turned to statistical machine learning models, which have been shown to be relatively effective. So in the graph on the right side or on the left side, you can see how machine learning methods have been increasing in flood literature since 2008. Specifically, the artificial neural networks have a very high rise, but also in the trees. But for the most part, machine learning methods are being turned towards. So you can use a statistical method that has been used in cellular automata, and it uses discrete time steps. It also takes into account water depth and flow simulations. Then you have the regression-based statistical model. You can use a Poisson or negative binomial. And these generalized linear regression models also take into account predictors and also maybe can identify which predictors are significant in the flooding for a certain area, or if you just predict perhaps flooding. And then we have machine learning, and the machine learning models are very good at reading the environment, learning, and providing useful information. And actually, our current research is machine learning exploration. So we're exploring machine models and seeing which one is the most suitable for a particular data set and environment. The artificial neural networks and decision trees have the great upward trend. All right, so lastly, we can talk a little bit about the mitigation techniques. So instead of modeling, or in addition to modeling, what can people do to reduce urban flooding? And a popular type of mitigation technique is the low impact developments. And they call them LIDs, and these are engineered designs to improve the filtration in urban areas. So the number one, or the most popular, seems to be the green roof. Green roofs are very popular. New York City has mandates. If you have a retrofit to your roof, you have to add a green roof, or you have to do solar panels. There's so many, and then there's also rebates. So green roofs are very popular, and basically what it is, you're putting vegetation on the roof, and it has soil, and so when it rains, it absorbs a little bit or a lot, and that way the runoff is something into the ground. So green roofs are very popular here in New York. They reduce runoff volume, peak rates, but there's also permeable pavements. These are an artificial type of material that absorbs water and then slowly releases it. And then lastly, or another example, are the rain gardens. And They're usually constructed at the bottom of an incline, and they gather the water again and then redirect the water flow. So that also helps with infiltration. All right, so the points to remember: urban flooding may produce fatalities and injuries, so they're dangerous to the humans. There is large-scale direct economic damages. There are also secondary economic costs to people and governments and companies. Extreme storms are projected to increase in occurrence due to climate change. Also, urbanization is estimated to grow. So there'll be more people affected in these urban areas by flooding. There are models of this physics-based models, but there's some issues with that. And number one, data availability, also the cost. Moreover, machine learning techniques have proved to be efficient and effective. So a lot of researchers and stakeholders are turning towards statistical machine learning models. And then finally, there are development techniques, such as green roofs, permeable pavements, rain gardens, that are being used to help impede the occurrence of urban flooding. So if you have any questions.
So I was wondering, so you're using data-driven method, so what's the data look like? What's the size of it? What these data are?
Ideally, I feel like the data would be water measurements from sensors. That would be the ideal data to have access to, but in New York, we don't have that either. So what we're using is crowdsourced data. And in New York, the good thing about the city is that there's a 301 platform, and people can actually report specifically for street flooding. So that's the response variable, the predictor variables. One is precipitation, so there's a few expressions of that variable we're using. We have max rainfall, and then we also have total rainfall. Then you have elevation, slope, fog. I would think that that's also really data stuff. So you have that as a dynamic there, still that still and other graphical variables as well.
Also sounds like it has to be related to the weather.
Like how?
Because there's a lot of rainfall when it happens, so you have to know a little bit more about what's going to happen.
I think, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Like if you can predict that for in the future, what we're currently thinking about is if there's a predicted rainfall already. Not so much like, oh, is it going to flood in New York for 5 years, but more immediate. So the rain will already be there, the rainfall projection. Now we're just going to see where it's going to flood.
Thanks.
Very interesting. Thanks. I'm wondering if you could, well, actually, if you know why the city or like New York would use a service, the drainage data.
I think they feel like it's some security concern. That people maybe they can go hide in the drains. I think that's what it is.
So much for your presentation. This is not so much of a question, it's more of a comment. So one of our groups from the Summer Institute became really interested in climate resilience in cities, and they had to obviously really narrow that down for a lesson. And they decided to look at urban flooding and how that impacts schooling and kids around the world. And one, the book that they chose is called Rain School, and it has to do with a school in China that floods every year, and why does it flood? And they piloted the lesson, and we got to see the results of that pilot last night. And the number one question that the kids had was, why are we so bad at predicting floods in cities? And they kept on asking that over and over again to the teacher. So I love that I now have watched this and be like, hey, we actually understand why we need to be better at this. And those are the points.
That's interesting. So there's a book called Rain School.
It's called Rain School.
It's all about that one school.
Yeah, that apparently floods every year. And so they had the kids read it, they're reflecting on it, and ideally, they want in the spring to have the kids actually build structures that are resistant to flooding in an engineering-based class.
That's interesting. So maybe, they can save their own school. That's cool.
On the Zoom. Yeah, well, there's a question on the Zoom. Okay, this is a question from Cherise Laveau. Have cities been able to utilize artificial intelligence predictions to design urban flooding management structures, or specifically has New York City?
Not New York City that I know of. But I have to look into that, but I feel that there are some cities that use artificial intelligence and modeling to make policy decisions. But I would look into that.
Maybe we can put and thank speakers again. Thanks so much.